I was standing in my Seoul penthouse, looking out at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I felt absolutely nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had everything most people dream about: the career, the recognition, the financial security that comes with years of successful music and world tours. But there was this hollowness inside me that I couldn't shake. It was 2019, and I had just finished back-to-back world tours and album promotions. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I remember calling Taehyung and telling him, "I feel like I'm performing even when the cameras are off." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe it's time to stop performing altogether." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I'd wake up at 3:00 inches the morning, this restless energy coursing through me, and I'd walk through my house like a ghost. I started thinking about my childhood, about the simple life I had before all of this. I grew up in Busan, passionate about singing and dance from a young age. My family didn't have much, but I remember feeling more present then, more connected to the actual texture of life. Somewhere along the way, success had insulated me from that feeling. The thought came to me one morning while I was stuck in a traffic jam heading to a photo shoot I didn't want to attend, surrounded by thousands of other people, also going places they probably didn't want to go. I looked around at all these faces behind windshields, everyone isolated in their metal boxes, and something clicked. I didn't want this anymore. I didn't want the noise, the constant stimulation, the relentless pace. I wanted something real. 3 months later, I moved to a small town in the countryside. I'm not going to tell you exactly where because that defeats the entire purpose, but it's one of those places where people actually wave at strangers, and the local diner knows your coffee order by your third visit. My friends in Seoul thought I'd lost my mind. My manager was concerned about my accessibility for recordings and meetings. But I knew I had to do this, not just for a break, but as a fundamental reset of how I was living. The first week was harder than I expected. Not because the town was difficult, but because I was. I realized how addicted I'd become to distraction. Without constant stimulation, I had to face myself, really face myself. All the questions I'd been avoiding came rushing in. What was I doing with my life? Was I happy? When was the last time I felt genuinely joyful rather than just accomplished? I'd sit on the porch of my small rental house, looking out at nothing in particular, and these waves of anxiety would hit me. My mind kept reaching for my phone, for something to do, some problem to solve. But there was nothing urgent, nothing demanding my immediate attention. It was terrifying. I started taking long walks because I didn't know what else to do with myself. There's this trail near my house that winds through woods and eventually opens up to a meadow. I'd walk it every morning, and at first I was still in my head, still mentally in Seoul, thinking about projects and obligations. But gradually over days and then weeks, something shifted. I started noticing things. The way light filtered through the trees at different times of day, the sound of a creek that I'd walked past dozens of times without really hearing. There was this old oak tree about 2 miles in, probably hundreds of years old. And one morning I just stopped in front of it. I put my hand on the bark and stood there for I don't know how long, and I felt this overwhelming sense of time. This tree had been here long before me and would be here long after. My problems, my career, my identity, all of it felt suddenly very small, but not in a depressing way, in a liberating way. That's when I met Henry. He was sitting on a bench near the meadow, sketchpad in his lap, completely absorbed in drawing. He must have been in his 72nd, wearing paint-stained jeans and a flannel shirt. I walked past him several times over the next few days, and we'd nod at each other, but we didn't speak. There's something beautiful about that, about being in someone's presence without the pressure to perform or explain yourself. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I asked him what he was drawing. He showed me a sketch pad, and it was filled with incredibly detailed drawings of ordinary things. A fallen log, a cluster of wildflowers, the pattern of bark on a tree. He told me he'd been an advertising executive in New York for 30 years, made a lot of money, had a big apartment, all the trappings. Then he had a heart attack at 52, survived it, but it scared him straight. He realized he'd spent 3 decades selling things people didn't need and hadn't created anything meaningful in his entire life. So he moved to this town, bought a small house, and started drawing every single day for the past 20 years. He'd come out here and draw. He said something that stuck with me. I spent the first half of my life trying to be important. Now I'm spending the second half trying to pay attention. That became my mantra, pay attention. It sounds simple, almost stupid, but it's incredibly difficult. We're so conditioned to skim the surface of experience, to be thinking about the next thing while we're in the middle of the current thing. I started practicing what I called radical presence. When I ate, I just ate. When I walked, I just walked. When I talked to someone, I gave them my full attention instead of planning what I was going to say next. It was like learning a new language, the language of actually being where I was. The town started to reveal itself to me in layers. There was Margaret, who ran the bookstore and had this incredible collection of poetry. She'd escaped an abusive marriage in her 40 seconds and rebuilt her entire life from scratch. She told me once over coffee that moving to this town and opening the bookstore had saved her life. Not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, persistent way that true healing happens, she said. Every book I put in someone's hands feels like planting a seed. I'll never see most of them grow, but I know they're growing somewhere. That perspective, that patience with invisible growth was completely foreign to my K-pop industry mindset, where everything was about immediate results and measurable success. Then there was the hardware store owner, Jack, who'd inherited the business from his father. He could have sold it for a fortune to a chain store, but he kept it going because, as he put it, someone needs to remember how things actually work. He taught me how to fix things, how to work with my hands. I'd spent years performing physical actions for cameras, doing choreography and stunts, but I'd never actually built anything. Jack showed me how to repair a broken chair, how to sand wood, how to understand the grain and work with it instead of against it. There was this meditation and physical work that I'd never experienced. No ego, no performance, just the simple satisfaction of making something broken whole again. I started volunteering at the local community center. They needed help with their after-school program, just basic stuff, supervising kids, helping with homework, organizing activities. I was nervous about it at first. Would they recognize me? Would it become a thing? But the kids didn't care who I was. They cared if I could help them with their math homework or if I'd play basketball with them. There was this one kid, Marcus, about 12 years old, really quiet and withdrawn. He'd sit in the corner reading while the other kids played. I recognized something in him. That feeling of not quite fitting in. I started sitting with him, not pushing him to talk, just being there. Eventually, he opened up. His dad had left. His mom worked 2 jobs and he felt invisible. We started this routine where I'd help him with reading, and he'd tell me about the books he loved. Watching him slowly come out of his shell, seeing him start to trust again, it reminded me why any of this matters. Not the big flashy stuff, but these small moments of human connection. But it wasn't all enlightenment and peace. There were hard days when I felt isolated and questioned everything. I remember one particularly rough week when I was supposed to be at a major awards show for one of our albums. Everyone I knew was there, and I was sitting in a small rental house in the middle of nowhere, eating takeout from the only Chinese restaurant in town. I felt this pang of FOMO, this fear that I was missing out, that I was making a huge mistake. The voice in my head was relentless. You're wasting your life. You're becoming irrelevant. Everyone's gonna forget about you. I almost booked a flight back to Seoul that night. Instead, I went for a walk. It was late, probably around 11, and the town was completely quiet. I walked to the meadow where I'd met Henry, and I laid down in the grass and looked up at the stars. You can actually see the Milky Way here, something that's impossible in Seoul with all the light pollution. I lay there for maybe an hour, and I thought about what success actually meant to me. Was it being at that award show? Was it maintaining visibility? Or was it this, lying under stars, feeling small and connected to something vast? I realized that the fear of irrelevance was just ego. And ego had been driving me for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to act from a different place. The town taught me about slowness in a culture obsessed with speed. There's a rhythm here that's connected to seasons and weather and natural cycles, rather than comeback dates and production schedules. I learned to cook properly for the first time in my life. I had grown vegetables in a small garden behind my house. I watched them grow from seeds to plants to food on my plate. That process, which takes months and can't be rushed, taught me patience in a way nothing else could. You can't force a tomato to ripen faster. You can't negotiate with nature. You can only show up, do the work, and trust the process. I also learned about community in a way I'd never experienced it. In Seoul, I had friends and colleagues, but relationships often felt transactional. There was always this underlying calculus of networking and mutual benefit. Here, people helped each other because that's what you do. When my car broke down, 3 neighbors showed up to help, and they wouldn't take money for their time. When Henry fell and injured his hip, the whole town organized a meal train for him. There was this web of care that existed independently of fame or wealth or status. You mattered because you were there, because you were part of the community, not because of what you could do for people. I started writing during this time, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the space for. Not songs or anything professional, just personal reflections. I'd sit at a small desk by the window early in the morning before the day got busy, and I'd write about what I was learning. It was rough and unpolished, but it was mine. There was no pressure for it to become anything. It was just a practice, a way of processing experience. I wrote about my childhood, about my family, about the friends I'd lost over the years. I wrote about the pressures of debut, about how the sudden global scale had affected me more than I'd ever admitted. I wrote about loneliness, about the strange isolation that comes with fame, about how you can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. One of the most profound experiences I had was helping organize a community play. The local school was putting on a production and they needed volunteers. I ended up helping with everything, building sets, running lines with kids, figuring out lighting. It reminded me why I fell in love with performing in the first place. Not the fame or the money, but the simple magic of storytelling, of people coming together to create something. On opening night, watching these kids perform for their families, seeing the joy and pride on everyone's faces, I felt more fulfilled than I had at any stadium concert. This mattered. This was real. The months turned into a year, and I found myself changing in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was softer, somehow, more patient. Things that would have stressed me out before, delays, inconveniences, unexpected changes, didn't bother me as much. I developed this deeper reservoir of calm. I also became more honest with myself and others. There was less pretense, less performing. I could admit when I didn't know something or when I was struggling. That vulnerability, which I'd always seen as weakness, became a source of strength. It allowed for a real connection. I learned that you don't find yourself by looking inward obsessively. You find yourself by getting out of your own way, by serving something larger than yourself. All the self-improvement and self-focus in the world hadn't done what simple acts of service did. Helping Marcus with his reading, building sets for the school play, fixing things with Jack at the hardware store. These mundane activities connected me to a sense of purpose that transcended my ego. There were also moments of stunning beauty that caught me off guard. One morning I woke up to fresh snow, the first real snow I'd experienced in years. Everything was transformed, quiet and white and pure. I made coffee and sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, just watching. No music, no podcast, no distraction, just snow falling and the silence it creates. I felt this overwhelming gratitude, not for anything specific, just for being alive, for having eyes to see this, for having slowed down enough to notice. But perhaps the biggest lesson came from Sarah, a woman I met at the bookstore. She was a painter, probably in her 60 seconds, with this wild gray hair and paint-stained hands. We started talking about art, about creativity, and she invited me to her studio. It was a converted barn filled with canvases, some finished, most in various stages of completion. She'd been painting for 40 years, had never had a major gallery show, had never made much money from her work, and she was completely at peace with that. She said, "The world's obsessed with outcomes. Who got famous? Who made money? Who won the prize? But the work itself is the point. The hours I spend painting, that's my life. That's where I'm most alive. Everything else is just noise." That hit me hard. I'd spent so much of my career focused on results, chart numbers, sales figures, awards, and yes, some of that matters professionally. But I'd let it become the metric for my worth. Sarah reminded me that the work itself, the actual process of creating, of showing up and doing the thing, that's where the meaning lives, not in the outcome, but in the practice. I went through a period of reckoning with my past during this time. All the mistakes I'd made, the relationships I'd neglected, the times I'd chosen work over people. I've been running for so long, using busyness as a shield against these deeper questions. Now, with nowhere to hide, I had to face them. I reached out to people I'd lost touch with, made amends where I could. Some of those conversations were uncomfortable, even painful, but they were necessary. I was learning that growth is uncomfortable. It requires confronting the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. The simplicity of life in the town was its own teacher. I had less stuff, which meant less to maintain, less to worry about. I wore the same few comfortable clothes. I ate simple meals. I spent my time on things that actually mattered to me rather than obligations. This minimalism wasn't about deprivation, it was about clarity. When you strip away all the excess, what remains is what's essential. I discovered I needed very little to be happy. Good food, good conversation, meaningful work, time in nature, sleep. That's basically it. Everything else was optional. Here's what I've learned, distilled into the lessons that changed everything for me. First, success means nothing if you're not present for your own life. All the achievements in the world can't substitute for the simple experience of being awake to your existence. I was successful by every external measure, but I was sleepwalking through my life. Moving to this town woke me up. Second, community is not optional. We're not meant to be isolated individuals pursuing personal achievement. We're meant to be connected, to help each other, to be part of something larger than ourselves. The modern world has atomized us, and we're suffering because of it. Third, slowness is not laziness. In fact, slowness requires tremendous discipline in a culture that's constantly pushing for more and faster. But in slowness, you find depth, you find presence, you find life as it actually is, not as you're racing past it. Fourth, your worth is not your productivity. This one is hard because we've been conditioned to believe that our value is measured by our output, but you are not what you produce. You are inherently valuable simply by existing. Fifth, simplicity is sophisticated. It takes wisdom to know what's essential and courage to let go of everything else. The cluttered life looks full but often feels empty. The simple life looks empty but often feels full. Sixth, serving others is how you find yourself. I know that sounds paradoxical, but it's true. When you stop obsessing over your own needs and pay attention to how you can be helpful, you become more yourself, not less. Seventh, nature heals. This isn't woo spirituality. It's biological fact. We evolved in nature, and we need it. Spending time outside away from screens and noise recalibrates something essential in us. Eighth, you can't think your way into a new life. You have to live your way into new thinking. I could have done therapy and meditation and read philosophy forever, but real change came from actually changing how I live day to day. Ninth, what you think you need and what you actually need are often completely different. I thought I needed more success, more achievement, more recognition. What I actually needed was less noise, less stimulation, less performance. I needed space to remember who I was before the world told me who to be. Looking back now at these years in this small town, I can see patterns I couldn't see while I was living there. There's a thread running through all of it, and the thread is this. I was learning to distinguish between what's real and what's performance. My whole career is about performance, and somewhere along the way, I forgot how to stop performing. I performed being successful, performed being okay, performed being present, but performance, no matter how good, is not the same as reality. What I found in this town was reality, unscripted and unpolished, often uncomfortable reality. And reality, it turns out, is what I'd been missing. The other pattern I noticed is that almost every meaningful lesson involves some kind of letting go. Letting go of my old identity, letting go of my attachment to fame, letting go of my need for constant validation, letting go of my belief that happiness comes from external achievements. We're so afraid of loss in our culture that we avoid it at all costs. But avoiding loss means avoiding growth. The two are inseparable. You can't have renewal without release. I had to let so much go to become more alive. I also realized that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. I'd been lonely in soul, surrounded by people. I found solitude here, and solitude is rich and nourishing in a way loneliness never is. Loneliness is feeling disconnected even when you're with others. Solitude is feeling connected even when you're alone. That distinction changed everything for me. I learned to enjoy my own company, to not need constant stimulation or validation from others. That self-sufficiency wasn't about isolation. It was about being whole enough that connection could be a choice rather than a desperate need. And here's the thing that really transformed my understanding. All the wisdom traditions, all the philosophy I'd read, all the spiritual teachings, they were pointing to the same thing. Pay attention, be present, let go of ego, serve others, find what's essential. It's not complicated, but it's incredibly difficult because it goes against everything our culture teaches us. We are told to accumulate, to achieve, to broadcast ourselves, to compete, to never be satisfied. The wisdom traditions say the opposite. Let go, be still, be humble, cooperate, be grateful for what is. Moving to this town forced me to live that wisdom rather than just intellectually understand it. The philosophical truth at the heart of all this is both simple and profound. You are not separate from life. You are not an isolated individual trying to make your way through a hostile world. You are an expression of life itself, connected to everything and everyone. The suffering comes from forgetting that connection, from the illusion of separation. Every spiritual tradition points to this truth in different languages. It's all the same inside. You are not alone. You are not separate. You are part of a vast, interconnected whole. Living in this town brought me back into that felt sense of connection, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. When you shop at the same stores, walk the same paths, see the same faces, help your neighbors, and are helped by them, you feel your place in the web. You understand viscerally that your well-being and their well-being are not separate. That changes how you move through the world. It makes you kinder, more patient, more willing to contribute. So, here's what I want you to understand. You don't have to move to a small town. That was my path, and it might not be yours, but you do need to find a way to reconnect with what's real. You need to find practices that bring you into presence, communities that remind you you're not alone, activities that connect you to something larger than your ego. You need to get honest about what you're running from and have the courage to stop running. The pain you're feeling, the dissatisfaction, the restlessness, the sense that something's missing. Even when everything looks good on paper, that's not a problem to be solved. It's information. It's your deeper self trying to get your attention, trying to tell you that you've drifted off course. Listen to it. Don't medicate it with more achievement or more distraction. That pain is pointing you towards something. It's asking you to change, to grow, to become more fully yourself. And here's the really important part. You don't need permission to change your life. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment or for someone to tell you it's okay. You don't need to have it all figured out before you take the first step. I didn't know what I was doing when I moved here. I just knew I couldn't keep living the way I was living. The clarity came later through the living of it. You figure it out by doing it, not by thinking about it endlessly. The greatest gift I've received from this experience is a kind of fearlessness about being ordinary. I'm no longer trying to be special or important or impressive. I'm just trying to be present and helpful and honest. That's enough. In fact, it's everything. The performance of specialness was exhausting and ultimately hollow. The experience of ordinariness is restful and surprisingly rich. When you stop trying to be extraordinary, you become available to the extraordinary nature of ordinary life. A good conversation, a beautiful sunset, a project completed with care. These simple things are where meaning lives. Your life is not a movie. There's no script, no guaranteed happy ending, no audience applauding your choices. It's just you here now making decisions about how to spend your time and energy. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is that you have more freedom than you think. You are not as trapped as you believe. Yes, there are constraints, financial, familial, social, but within those constraints, there is enormous space to choose differently, to live more intentionally, to align your daily existence with what you actually value. So, start small. You don't have to upend your entire life tomorrow, but you can start paying attention today. Notice where you're performing and where you're being real. Notice what drains you and what nourishes you. Notice the difference between what you think you should want and what you actually want. Start creating small pockets of presence in your day. A walk without your phone, a meal without distraction, a conversation where you're fully listening. These practices accumulate. They change you slowly the way water shapes stone. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not too far gone. Whatever story you're telling yourself about why change is impossible for you, I promise you, it's just a story. I've met people who transformed their lives at 70, at 80. I've met people who rebuilt after losing everything. The human capacity for renewal is extraordinary. We can become new at any moment. We can choose differently today than we chose yesterday. That's the gift of being alive. This is what I want you to take from my story. The life you're living right now doesn't have to be the life you live forever. You can change. You can start over. You can let the old self go and see what emerges. It won't be easy or comfortable, but it will be real. And real, I've discovered, is what we're all hungry for underneath all the noise and performance and distraction. We want to feel alive, connected, purposeful. You have one life. This is it. Not the life you'll live when you have more money or more time or more confidence. Not the life that starts after you achieve the thing you're chasing. This life right now, with all its imperfections and limitations, it's already happening. The question is whether you're present for it or whether you're so focused on some imagined future that you're missing the only moment that's actually real, which is this one. The small town is still here, and so am I. Changed, quieter, more myself than I've ever been. I still make music, but it comes from a different place now. I choose projects that mean something to me rather than projects that will maintain my status. I say no more often. I protect my time and energy. I've learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential, and I'm okay with being forgotten or becoming irrelevant in the K-pop world's eyes, because I found a kind of relevance that matters more, being present and helpful in the lives of actual people I actually know. This is my confession, my transformation, my truth. Not the performance of transformation, but the lived reality of it. With all its messiness and uncertainty and beauty, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still showing up to the practice of being present and honest and kind. That's all any of us can do. Show up, pay attention, be real. Everything else follows from that. The small town was still here, and so am I. Changed, quieter, more myself than I've ever been. I still make music, but it comes from a different place now. I choose projects that mean something to me rather than projects that will maintain my status. I say no more often. I protect my time and energy. I've learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential, and I'm okay with being forgotten or becoming irrelevant in the K-pop world's eyes, because I've found a kind of relevance that matters more, being present and helpful in the lives of actual people I actually know. This is my confession, my transformation, my truth. Not the performance of transformation, but the lived reality of it. With all its messiness and uncertainty and beauty, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still showing up to the practice of being present and honest and kind. That's all any of us can do. Show up, pay attention, be real. Everything else follows from that, the rhythm of the real. Deeper into the silence. The initial year was about detox, shedding the layers of performance and distraction. The second year was about integration, taking the raw lessons and weaving them into the fabric of daily existence. It was less dramatic, more subtle, like the slow, quiet growth of the roots beneath the soil. My relationship with Henry, the painter, evolved into a mentorship of a different kind. He didn't teach me how to draw, but he taught me how to see. He'd tell me, "You spent your life trying to create perfect sounds for a stadium of 10,000 people. Now, try to capture the sound of a single leaf dropping onto a wet path." It's much harder. I started spending time with him, not drawing, but just observing. Henry had this incredible patience. He could sit for an hour just looking at the way the moss grew on a particular stone. He explained that most people, especially those who live fast, look at things to categorize them. That's a stone. That's moss. Moving on. But to truly see, you have to look without a label, without an agenda. You have to let the stone be a universe of texture and shadow and tiny life forms. This practice began to inform my music again, but in a completely unexpected way. Back in Seoul, writing was a competitive, high-pressure act, focused on hooks, marketability, and global appeal. Here, I picked up my guitar again, the same old one I used to hide from the world with, and started writing for the sheer joy of sound. It was raw. It was simple. The melodies were no longer massive, stadium-ready anthems. They were quiet, acoustic vignettes inspired by the sounds of the town, the creek, the wind through the meadow, the creak of the porch swing. I recorded them simply, just my voice and the guitar, sometimes with the sound of rain outside the window. I wasn't making an album, I was making a journal. The paradox of the empty space. I realized that my greatest asset as an artist had always been my ability to convey authentic emotion. Yet, the process of becoming a superstar had systematically disconnected me from the source of that emotion, my own quiet, unperformed self. The silence of the countryside was terrifying precisely because it was so empty of the noise I used to fill myself with. But that emptiness was also a reservoir. In the industry, every silence was a gap to be filled, a second of airtime that needed a high-impact beat or a vocal run. Here, silence was the background hum of the universe. It was the canvas against which everything else became meaningful. Note on creative renewal. I found that the most genuine creativity doesn't come from forcing ideas in a loud room, but from allowing them to bubble up naturally in a quiet one. The silence wasn't a void. It was fertile ground. Jack's workshop. The wisdom of working hands. My time with Jack at the hardware store became another crucial axis of my new life. Jack, a man of simple, deliberate movements, saw no difference between mending a broken chair and solving a complex life problem. Both required attention to the flaw and a commitment to patience. He was initially skeptical of me. He'd seen enough weekend tourists pass through, looking for a temporary dose of authenticity. He didn't care about the fact that I was Jungkook. He cared about whether I could use a chisel without slicing my thumb off. The lesson of imperfection. I was used to perfection. In dance, in recording, in my public image, everything was polished to a mirror sheen. When I started working with wood, my attempts were clumsy. The joints didn't fit flush. The varnish streaked. I'd want to scrap the whole thing and start over. Jack would stop me. "Mistakes are just information, son," he'd say, not unkindly. "You learn more from fixing a bad joint than from making a perfect one the first time." The goal isn't perfection, it's integrity. Does it hold? Does it serve its purpose? Does it honor the material? He taught me the concept of working with the grain. Every piece of wood has a direction, a natural tendency. If you work against it, it splinters and resists. If you work with it, it yields beautifully. I started applying this to my life. I had spent so many years fighting my own natural grain, my introversion, my need for quiet, my simple tastes, trying to force myself into the loud, relentless, extroverted grain of the entertainment industry. Now, I was learning to sand, to plane, to shape my life with my natural inclinations, not against them. This physical work was a profound form of therapy. There was no ambiguity. Either the shelf was level or it wasn't. The tangibility of the results was a relief after years of chasing ephemeral things like popularity and influence. At the end of the day in the workshop, I had a physical object, a repaired fence, a new birdhouse, a strong table. It was a simple, undeniable form of work, the garden of patience, the unseen process. Growing my small vegetable garden was perhaps the most challenging and rewarding practice of slowness. In the K-pop world, results are immediate. A song is released, and within hours, you know its performance on the charts. A performance is filmed, and it's edited and broadcast within days. Nature does not negotiate on speed. I remember watching my first tiny tomato seedlings, anxiously. I'd check them 3 times a day. If a leaf yellowed, I panicked. I tried to rush them with extra water, extra fertilizer. They resisted. They were tiny, fragile, and absolutely governed by their own timeline. It taught me patience as an active virtue. It's not just waiting, it's tending while you wait. I had to learn the names of pests and friendly insects. I learned about soil health, about the necessity of darkness and winter for renewal. The plants taught me that meaningful growth is invisible most of the time. You can't see the roots expanding, but you know they are. You can't see the fruit swelling hour by hour, but you know it's ripening. This shifted my perspective on my career. For years, I was focused only on the visible fruit, the albums, the awards, the applause. Now, I understood the necessity of the invisible work, the quiet discipline, the reflection, the emotional rest. That unseen period was not empty time. It was the root system of my future self. When I finally harvested my first perfect, sun-warmed tomato, it was the culmination of months of effort and faith in a process beyond my control. That small, red sphere held more genuine satisfaction than any gold record. Margaret's bookstore. The deep dive of connection. Margaret, the bookstore owner, continued to be a lighthouse in my new life. Her bookstore wasn't just a place of business. It was a sanctuary of deep listening, the poetry of the ordinary. She introduced me to poets and writers who celebrated the mundane writers, who found universes in a cup of coffee or a walk in the rain. I started reading deeply, not for study, but for resonance. One day, a young woman came in, clearly distraught. She was new to the town, having moved for a job, and felt incredibly isolated. Margaret didn't offer advice. She simply walked to a shelf and pulled out a worn copy of a collection by a Korean poet who often wrote about the quiet pain of being disconnected. Sometimes, Margaret told the girl, the greatest comfort is finding someone else who wrote down exactly what you feel. It's proof you're not crazy and you're not alone. I watched this exchange and realized Margaret's work was the opposite of my former life. I used to be the one on the stage, projecting my voice to millions, but the connection was one-directional and abstract. Margaret facilitated direct, specific connection between a lonely soul and a piece of art. I began spending time helping Margaret organize the backstock. She never asked me to discuss my past, but she saw my presence as an affirmation of her own journey. We talked about her past abusive marriage, which she spoke of not with bitterness, but as a period of necessary refining fire. I had to burn away everything they said I was, she reflected one afternoon, dusting a shelf of classics. I thought I needed a big, dramatic exit, but the real change was just the quiet, daily decision to choose my own narrative. Every book I sell, every conversation I have that's me choosing my own story. Her wisdom reinforced my own path. Transformation is not a sudden, explosive event. It is a cumulative series of small, honest choices. The community center. The joy of invisibility. My volunteering at the after-school program, initially a nervous venture, became my favorite part of the week. The children were my most honest and effective teachers. Marcus, the quiet boy whose father had left, continued to be a focus. I started to see my younger self in him, the intense passion, the shyness, the feeling of not knowing where to put all that energy. We didn't just work on homework. I introduced him to drawing, which I had picked up myself from observing Henry. I didn't push him to draw anything good or impressive. I just encouraged him to draw what was in his head. He drew fantastic, intricate worlds, spaceships, dragons, and a small, lone figure often standing on a hill, looking out at a vast landscape. I recognized the loneliness, but also the powerful internal world. I realized my job was not to fix him, but to give him tools for self-expression and a safe space to be seen. One day, during a simple game of basketball, I noticed two of the younger kids arguing fiercely over a foul. I stepped in, not to arbitrate who was right, but to get them to listen to each other. I used the language I'd learned from Jack and Margaret. Slow down. Pay attention to the person in front of you. What is the real problem here? It wasn't about the foul. It was about feeling respected. We solved it not by decree, but by setting a new ground rule that prioritized listening over winning. This was the first time I fully felt the power of my newfound calm. In my past life, every confrontation was high stakes, requiring a performance of strength or cool detachment. Here, I could be present, patient, and genuinely kind. And the problem simply dissolved in the warmth of that attention. The endless walk, the meditation of motion. My daily walk to the meadow became a non-negotiable ritual, a physical meditation. I stopped bringing my phone, a choice that still feels radical in the modern world. In the second year, the walk shifted from a way to burn off restless anxiety to a deliberate practice of sensory immersion. I didn't listen to music. I listened to the forest. I could now distinguish the sound of a crow's wing, beats from a pigeon's, the rustle of maple leaves from the shiver of aspen. I could smell the damp earth, the pine needles, and the change in the air just before the rain. I realized that my body was the ultimate place of presence. When I focused on the simple act of walking, the weight shifting from heel to toe, the pull of gravity, the slight pain in my knees, I was completely anchored in the now. My mind was too busy coordinating movement and perception to obsess over past regrets or future anxieties. One afternoon, I was caught in a sudden, torrential downpour miles from home. My first instinct was panic. I'll ruin my clothes. I need to run. This is a mess. Then, I stopped. I stood completely still under the thick cover of the oak tree. The rain was drumming a violent rhythm on the leaves, and the air was thick and clean. I just let the panic pass, watched the chaos, and realized I was perfectly safe and profoundly alive. In that moment, soaked and calm, I understood the concept of acceptance without resignation. I accepted the rain, but I did not resign my inner peace to it. I accepted the discomfort, but I did not let it control my emotional state. This was the core of my transformation. The ability to experience discomfort or chaos while maintaining an inner, unshakable center. The fear of the fade. Confronting irrelevance. Despite all the peace, the voice of the ego never completely disappeared. It just became quieter and more sophisticated. It didn't shout. It whispered insidious doubts. It's easy to be calm when you're hiding in the woods. Let's see you handle a press conference now. Your fans are moving on. You are becoming a footnote. One night, the town hosted a small talent show at the community center. I was asked to play a song, just a simple acoustic set. The stage was a worn wooden platform. The audience was 50 people, mostly families, seniors, and a handful of teenagers who were more interested in their phones. This was the antithesis of a stadium concert. I decided to play one of the new, quiet songs I had written in my journal. It was called The Sound of the Quiet. The song wasn't technically challenging. It had a simple chord structure and lyrics about the feeling of lying in the grass and noticing small things. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, a natural, unforced silence, not the roaring silence of a stadium waiting for the next beat drop. Then, a few slow claps and a quiet, genuine applause. I saw Henry nod. I saw Margaret smile. I saw Marcus looking up from his hands, a thoughtful expression on his face. The performance wasn't successful by any old metric, but it was real. It was a piece of my truth offered to people who cared about me, not the performance. In that moment, the whisper of the ego, the fear of irrelevance sounded thin and ridiculous. Relevance, I realized, is not measured in billions of views. It is measured in the depth of your presence in the few lives you touch. My relevance here was concrete. I was the person who helped with the math, who fixed the chair, who brought the quiet song. Key insight: the fear of missing out, FOMO, is replaced by the joy of JOMO, joy of missing out. When you realize you're not missing life, you're just missing the performance of life, the path forward. a new definition of purpose. As the second year approached its end, the question inevitably arose. What now? I wasn't ready to return to the machine, but I also knew the purpose of the town was not to be a permanent escape. It was a forge. I had spent 2 years rebuilding my inner architecture. It was time to test the foundation. My goal was no longer to achieve global domination. It was to contribute authenticity. I decided to release the songs I had written, not through a massive label campaign, but quietly, independently, under a new pseudonym. I wanted the music to stand on its own, without the weight of my past fame or the pressure of charts. The music was slow, acoustic, personal. It was music for the walk in the woods, for the late night reflection, for the small, sacred moments. I wrote a simple message for the release. This music is the sound of coming home. Home is not a place. It is the space you make when you stop running. I offer these sounds not as an achievement, but as a practice of presence. Thank you for listening quietly. The response was surprising. It didn't break records, but it resonated deeply with a niche audience, people who were also tired, who were also looking for slowness. The comments weren't about my vocal technique or the production value. They were about the feeling. This is the sound of permission, one person wrote. Permission to slow down. This success, authentic, small, and aligned with my soul, was the most fulfilling of my career. It proved that I could use my voice without selling my piece, the final wisdom of the town. Before I left the small town, for I knew the next phase of my journey was calling, I had a final coffee with Margaret and a last session in the workshop with Jack. Margaret's final word on narrative. You've learned that your life isn't a competition, Jungkook. It's a story, and you get to be the author. The biggest difference between a great story and a forgettable one is the quality of the main character's attention to the world. Go write an attentive life. Jack's final word on integrity. The strongest things I've ever built weren't the newest. They were the ones I took the time to repair properly. Go out there, and when you break, take the time to fix yourself with integrity. Don't patch it up with quick fame or distraction. Use good wood. Use good glue. It'll hold. Henry's final lesson on seeing. You are not the sun, my boy. You are the mirror. Your job is to reflect the light, not to generate it. The light is everywhere. Just be a clean, still surface and let the world show you its beauty. I packed up my small rental house, leaving behind the clutter of my past identity, bringing only the essentials, the quiet guitar, the journal, and the profound lessons etched into my soul. I left a substantial, anonymous donation to the Community Center's arts program. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything. I was walking towards a life of radical presence, ready to find the extraordinary nature of ordinary life wherever I landed. The performance was over. The life was beginning. Creating a narrative that meets a 10,000 word count on demand is highly challenging due to the sheer volume required, equivalent to a short novel. However, I will continue to expand the story substantially, focusing on rich detail, deep philosophical introspection, and the daily life of the characters to get as close as possible to your request within the limits of this format. I will structure the continuation by dedicating significant portions to the relationships and the practical application of his learned wisdom, particularly the themes of vulnerability, discipline, and authentic creativity. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Solitude. The daily discipline of not doing. The third year in the small town, which I informally dubbed the Year of Intentionality, was less about dramatic breakthroughs and more about the tedious, grounding work of integrating the lessons. It's one thing to realize that you need less. It's another thing to continuously choose less when the old habits whisper. The core challenge I faced was the residue of the performance mindset. For 2 decades, my brain had been wired for perpetual motion and problem solving. What's the next single? How high are the streams? What is my public image saying? This wiring didn't dissolve overnight. It presented itself now as relentless mental noise, the constant urge to optimize my quiet life. I fought the urge to turn my simplicity into a new kind of achievement. I had to stop saying, "Look how present I am," or "Look how few things I own." That was just performance and camouflage. I learned the truth. You cannot weaponize simplicity against the complexity of the world. My anchor in this period was the deepening of my morning ritual, which evolved from a simple walk to a rigorous practice of radical sensory immersion, the cold plunge. I installed a simple trough in my backyard, filled with fresh creek water. Every morning, regardless of the weather, I stepped into the icy water. It was pure, unadulterated shock. For 60 seconds, there was no room for my ego, no space for celebrity worries or creative block. There was only the visceral, animal reality of being cold. This ritual taught me to voluntarily submit to discomfort. I learned that pain and panic are often transient. You can experience them fully without being destroyed by them. I would emerge from the water shaking, but profoundly awake and clear-headed. My breath, which had been shallow and tense for years, became deep and slow, unstructured sound. After the plunge, I would sit on the porch, often for 2 hours, with nothing but a notebook, listening. I didn't listen for a song idea. I listened to the tapestry of sound, the distant chainsaw, the wind chimes next door, the thump-thump of a woodpecker, the distinct chirp of a local bird I learned to identify as a white-breasted nuthatch. This was a form of composition. I was internalizing the rhythms of the world, realizing that the greatest music is already happening, everywhere. I was learning to be an interpreter, not just a generator. The ugly sketch. I also continued the habit of sketching, inspired by Henry. I drew ugly, imperfect things, the dent in my old truck, the mismatched paint on the porch railing, the awkward tangle of electrical wires. I enforced a rule: no erasing. The mistake had to be incorporated. This was a battle against my internalized pursuit of visual perfection, a holdover from endless hours in front of cameras. By accepting the ugliness on the page, I was accepting the messiness of my own inner landscape. This daily discipline, cold, quiet, and creatively imperfect, was the true foundation of my new self. It was the antithesis of the highly managed, perfectly edited existence I had once led. The financial guardrail. One practical decision during this time was establishing what I called my financial guardrail. I had accumulated more than enough wealth to live comfortably for many lifetimes, but the money itself was an anchor to the old world, demanding maintenance, investment meetings, and strategic growth. I met with a simple, local financial advisor, a woman named Clara, whose office smelled of pine and old paper, not high-rises and cologne. I explained my goal: to simplify, to disconnect my self-worth from my net worth, and to ensure my fortune served the world without demanding my continuous servitude. I set up several charitable trusts focused on arts, education, and mental health resources for struggling young artists, the parts of the industry that chew people up and spit them out. By redirecting the majority of my assets into institutions that ran themselves, I created a massive distance between the Jungkook brand and Jungkook the person. Clara, who had no idea of my celebrity background, simply said, "Most people only worry about how to make it grow. You're worried about how to let it go." It was an act of profound liberation. I kept only what I needed for a comfortable, simple life. The rest was put to use. The constant background noise of, "What should I do with all this money?" finally faded. I became financially invisible, and with that, emotionally free. Chapter 4. Henry and the Timelessness of Art. The Dialogue of Decades. Henry became the quiet elder statesman of my journey. Our conversations were rarely about grand philosophy. They were about the light. "Look at the shadow," he'd command, pointing his charcoal stick at an old stone wall near the meadow. "It's not just black. It has blue. It has purple. It has the reflection of the sky." The artist's job is to see the truth of the shadow, not just the absence of light. I understood then that his artistic process was a metaphor for life. I had lived a life of black and white, success or failure, on or off, loved or hated. Henry lived in the subtle gradations of gray. He saw the complexity and beauty in the things I had once dismissed. The lesson of residual energy. He once drew my portrait, not in a formal sitting, but while I was talking to him about a difficult call with a former colleague who couldn't understand why I had walked away. When he finished, the drawing wasn't flattering. It captured a subtle tension around my eyes and a guardedness in my posture. "You bring the noise with you," Henry said, tapping the charcoal on the page. "Look here, around your shoulders. It's too tight. That's the residual energy of the stadium. You can be in the quiet, but if you carry the performance with you, you're still performing." It was a profound mirror. He didn't just capture my likeness. He captured the tension between my new self and my old wiring. I realized that the hardest part of letting go was cleaning the residual static from my soul. I had to continuously choose to leave the past in the past, rather than dragging its energy into the present. The art of paying attention. Henry told me about his life as an advertising executive. "We didn't sell products. We sold dissatisfaction," he confessed. "We made people believe they were incomplete until they bought the next thing. My entire career was a lie built on the premise that the present moment is insufficient." His art now was an act of reparations, a daily, quiet prayer of gratitude for the present. When he drew a cluster of weeds, he wasn't saying, "This is a beautiful weed." He was saying, "This weed deserves my full, non-judgmental attention." This became my spiritual practice. In the past, my attention had been a transactional currency. I paid attention to those who could advance my career or those who demanded my time. Now, I gave my full, unreserved attention to the old man at the diner, the child struggling with a word, the quality of the sunlight on the wooden floor. I learned that attention is the currency of real love and connection. When you give someone your undivided attention, you are offering them the most valuable thing you possess, your limited, unrepeatable, present moment. Chapter 5. Jack and the integrity of the structure. The brokenness we share. My time with Jack at the hardware store was the antidote to the abstract. Jack dealt only in reality. Wood, steel, friction, and force. One cold afternoon, we were attempting to fix a very old, heavy wooden cabinet that the community center used for storing supplies. The hinges were rusted, the wood was warped, and the whole thing sagged. "It's easier to toss it and buy a new one," I said, thinking practically. Jack stopped sanding, looked up slowly, and fixed me with a gaze that held 70 years of life. Easiest? Yes, but easiest isn't always best. This cabinet has held history. It was built by old Mr. Peterson, who died 30 years ago. It has a story. You toss it, you toss the story. He explained that fixing something is not just about functionality. It's about honoring the past and restoring integrity. We took the cabinet completely apart. We had to steam the warped wood back into shape, meticulously clean the rusted hinges, and reinforce every joint. It was slow, frustrating work. "Look at this," Jack said, pointing to a hairline fracture in the wood. "It looks small, but if you don't reinforce it, the whole thing will fail eventually." Most people ignore the small fractures in their life. They focus on the big, visible crack, but the cabinet fails from the inside out. It was an undeniable parallel to my own life. My fracture, the hollowness, had been small and easy to ignore for years, while the exterior, my career, was brilliant and strong. The ultimate failure came from within, the meditation of the nail. Jack taught me about using a hammer. When I first started, I was tentative, missing the nail head, bending the nail. "You're trying to impress the nail," Jack laughed. "The hammer swing is not a performance. It's a precise application of force. You don't hit at the nail. You hit through the nail. You hit the point where the nail needs to be." This philosophy was profound. I had lived my life hitting at goals, at fame, at perfection. It led to bent efforts and wasted energy. Jack taught me to aim for the point of contact, the present moment of the work. The lesson: true discipline is not about brute force. It is about precise intention. After months of practice, I could drive a nail straight and true with a satisfying single thwack. The act of hammering became a moving meditation, a brief, powerful exercise in total presence. The physical work grounded the spiritual realization. I was here, in this body, doing this one thing right now. Chapter 6. The Unperformance. Reclaiming the voice. The quiet release of my music, under the new, inconspicuous name, proved a vital bridge. The unexpected success, not in volume, but in quality of connection, validated my path. I realized that my true purpose as an artist was to be a vessel for vulnerability, not a spectacle of talent. My voice had become powerful because it was no longer trying to be powerful. It simply was. A small independent music festival focused on folk and acoustic music learned of my new project and invited me to play. The stage was outdoors, on a hillside, overlooking fields. The audience was maybe 300 people, sitting on blankets. I almost said no. The sheer scale was terrifying after 2 years of complete anonymity, but I remembered Jack's lesson. You have to test the integrity of the repair. I agreed. Backstage was a simple tent. No security, no entourage, just a few other musicians sipping tea and chatting quietly. I didn't introduce myself by my old name. I was just the quiet guy with a guitar. When I stepped onto the stage, the setting sun cast a golden light. I felt a surge of the old nervous energy, the performance adrenaline. I looked down at my hands on the fretboard, the hands that had fixed chairs and pulled weeds. I didn't open with a polished introduction. I simply looked at the audience, took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind I learned from the cold plunge, and said, "This song is about learning to stay where your feet are." Then, I played the sound of the quiet. The performance was imperfect. My voice cracked once. I missed a chord change. But I kept my eyes open, looking at the faces. I saw genuine connection, a woman closing her eyes, a couple holding hands, a young man wiping a tear. The applause at the end was warm, not explosive. I realized that an explosion of sound often drowns out the actual feeling. A warm applause is an affirmation of shared humanity. After the set, people approached me. They didn't ask for autographs or selfies. They simply said, "Thank you. That song really helped me with my own anxiety." I realized I was finally doing the work I was meant to do. Not achieving fame, but facilitating connection through shared fragility. The new creative ethos. My approach to music became an extension of my life lessons. No erasing. Record the first genuine vocal take, even if it has a slight imperfection. The imperfection is the human signature. Work with the grain. Write songs that align with my natural voice and emotional register, not what the market dictates. Honor the shadow. Address themes of loneliness, confusion, and fear, the shadows of the human experience, because those are the universal truths. Chapter 7. The unfolding web of care. The gift of mutuality. The town taught me that connection is not a convenience, it is a necessity. In Seoul, I had networking. Here, I had mutuality. A few months after the talent show, I came down with a bad case of the flu. I was miserable, isolated in my rental house. I didn't call anyone. The old instinct was to suffer in silent privacy. Within 24 hours, there was a quiet knock on the door. It was Margaret. She had heard I was sick from Jack, who heard it from a neighbor. She brought homemade soup, fresh bread, and a thermos of herbal tea. She didn't fuss or stay long. She just left the essentials and said, "We take care of our own, dear. You just rest." Later that day, Henry dropped off a small, framed watercolor of the oak tree, which he knew I loved. Jack stopped by and quietly checked my furnace, ensuring I was warm. This was a profound lesson in receiving. For years, my entire identity was built on giving, performances, interviews, charity, and achieving. Receiving felt like weakness, but in the town, it was simply the other side of the community coin. I realized you cannot truly be part of a community until you allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to receive.